Welcome to Counsel Culture, the Business of Law podcast brought to you by Byfield. Welcome back to Counsel Culture, the Business of Law podcast. Two guests this week. We've got James Booth and Edin Imsirovic from Financial News. Hello, boys.
Hello. Hey, how's it going?
Yeah, very well. Thank you. It's good to have you both on this week. James, it's been like a year that you've been on.
Sure, yeah. Repeat performance, but this time with my fantastic colleague, Edin.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, and it's your first time on the podcast as well. Is it your first time on any podcast or?
Yeah, I think this is my first time on any podcast.
So watch out.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, if there's anything you want to take away afterwards, we can do that.
Awesome. Yeah.
But I don't think you'll have any problem. I think you'll be fine. So I think this week we're going to start off with the kind of long feature that you guys published. Was it this week? About Paul Weiss, 1 year on, kind of looking back at how the firm grew and the strategy that it's kind of taken in doing so. What are your immediate thoughts on this whole year and how they've gone about it?
Yeah, I think it's been a massive story in the kind of London legal market. I'd say based on what we see, looking at what readers are interested in, I think it's the biggest story in the London legal market, even more than A&O merging with Shearman, which is crazy.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I think last summer was, pretty mad. Like, normally you expect over the summer, nothing really is going to happen.
Yeah.
And all this stuff kicked off. And, we broke quite a lot of these stories. So we broke Neil Sachdev leaving Kirkland, moving to Paul Weiss, and all the kind of ins and outs at the time. And, Roger Johnson, who was one of the Kirkland partners, getting fired and for talking to Paul Weiss.
Yeah.
And then this big team leaving to Paul Weiss from Kirkland, and it was kind of dynamite news really, because these are some of the biggest names in the London legal market at the biggest firm in the world, sort of falling out with each other and then going off to Paul Weiss, which I think had been, I think we say it in the feature, like a sleeping giant in London. For years, people have been talking about when will Paul Weiss, invest in London.
Yeah.
It hasn't happened. I think Brad Karp, talking on another podcast, that the chair of Paul Weiss, said that they've been thinking about it for decades. And then suddenly there was this opportunity. These guys were in the market and they've snapped them up. And not only that, they've invested heavily for the entire year. They're still making hires. You look at other firms like Cravath have launched an English law practice in London, last year? And they've only hired a couple of people, whereas Paul Weiss, I think, more than 150 lawyers now in London.
Yeah.
I think
it was 180.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
So impressive, because I think last year they were at about like 30 people in London or something like that.
Yeah, and I think, as we said in the feature, there's been some turnover as well. I think some of the people that were there have left, and I think they were kind of a US law focused sort of like tiny outpost really.
Yeah.
And now they're doing English law and they're investing in a big way. So there's been quite a big turnover, people leaving, and then a whole load of new people joining, both partner level, so from Kirkland obviously, and then Linklaters, Clifford Chance, Ropes and Gray. But also at the associate level, they've hired like lots and lots of English law associates at kind of great pace.
Yeah, and I think it was last week that they've launched a kind of training program as well in London, which didn't exist before.
Yeah.
So clearly, like they're kind of setting up shop properly. I think it's funny because most US firms that recently opened in London definitely do not go about growing in such an aggressive way. Most people just kind of really pick and choose and hire some good people, but at a very slow pace in comparison. So I think it's just really interesting that they've just decided to say, you know what, if we're going to go in, we're just going to go all in, put all the capital in, and then, hopefully it will bear fruit within the next 5 years or so.
Yeah.
So it's definitely a big business risk. And, I guess given the hires they've made, I think it will pay off.
Sure.
The gamble. I would hope so.
Yeah.
But I think it will. because these are people with big books of business.
Sure.
So I would be surprised if it didn't. But yeah, no, fascinating. The overnight comment from Brad Karp in the piece is really fascinating to me, that he just thought, I mean, I'm sure he wanted to take that direction anyway, because as you said in the piece, he was already steering the firm towards a more transactional place.
Yeah.
And I'm sure he would have eyed London for a long time. But it's really interesting that he just thought, you know what, like, I'm just going to splash all the cash now.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it was kind of one of those things where it's something they wanted to do for a long time.
Yeah.
And then, Sachdev became available, and, he is one of the kind of biggest kind of names in the London kind of legal debt finance market.
Yeah.
One of, a couple of, really big players in that area. So there's kind of almost, maybe there's a handful of other people that you could hire where you get the similar sort of impact and, how high profile he is, that kind of thing. And Roger Johnson as well is kind of was one of Kirkland's top M&A private equity guys in London. And what they've built is kind of, as we say in the piece, is kind of very Kirkland-esque. So it's a similar sort of kind of aimed at acting for private equity firms, doing kind of debt finance, high yield finance, M&A, restructuring funds, but then with the addition of public M&A, which is something that Paul Weiss focuses on, which Kirkland doesn't. And we'd also, we'd heard that one of the kind of big movers behind this expansion was Scott Barchet, who is this kind of huge cheese in US M&A. So joined Paul Weiss from Cravath, I think, which was, for Brad Karp when he was sort of moving the firm from its pure litigation focus to a more kind of diversified business. I think that was one of the kind of great milestones along the way. Hiring this like massive name in US M&A, and we'd heard that he was sort of kind of influential behind the scenes in this move. And with this kind of stuff, motivations for doing this, it is kind of like if you're in the US, you've got a big, client that you're doing M&A for. They're doing a deal in London. Do you want to be sending those fees to your rivals or to someone else? Do you risk, someone having that relationship in London and then trying to break into your relationship in the US? So it's a kind of expansive move, but in some ways, there's a kind of defensive element to it, even though it is a big gamble. Because you are trying to like protect those relationships but also get new relationships. And I think we said in the piece that we'd heard that, the new Paul Weiss hires, some of them have sent back work to the US, which, because again, that was one of the things that, that sort of came up is that, this is a risk and they are spending a lot of money, and, law firm partners are not known for having a kind of long-term perspective. These firms pay out their money every year. Do they want to get less because they've hired some guys in London? Not really. So it's all about kind of hitting the ground running and sort of being able to show the partners in the US that actually it's a good thing that they're there, because they're servicing US clients in London, and also they're sending deals back to the US. And in fact, the deal stats that we looked at as well showed that they'd sort of, had a good start. So,
yeah, that's correct. So if we look at just purely on a stats basis for Paul Weiss in terms of deal flow, the firm ranked third among law firms acting on European buyouts in the first half of this year. So according to merger market data, they advised on 8 deals, which was valued at nearly 18 billion. So that marked more than 1,000% increase in deal value compared with the same period last year. Also, we've seen that the firm has actually taken a really large amount of European high yield market share. So according to 9fin, In the first half of this year, Paul Weiss ranked number 3 in Europe, advising on a total of 9 high-yield deals, which accounted for around 16% of all deals in the European market. So it's gone up 8 places from the full year of 2023. But Kirkland, on the other hand, are also doing really well. It's not like all the work has gone to Paul Weiss.
No, of course.
Caney ranked 2nd in Europe on buyout deals for the first half of 2024, and they've advised on 27 deals, which is at a total of 26.7 billion, according to Merger Market. So I think that Paul Weiss have come in and are taking all the deals. That's not true. We can still see Caney around, especially in the European market on these big deal. So that's really, really cool.
Yeah, and I was going to say actually, Kenny moved very quickly to kind of plug the gaps left by these departures. So
very quickly.
So they hired Ian Barrett and Sinead O'Shea from Simpson Thatcher, and who are also kind of debt finance lawyers, and they're kind of at the top of the tree as well. It's kind of if you're going to replace Sachdev with someone, they're great people to replace them with, kind of thing. And the fact that they did it so quickly, reportedly expensively, but it kind of shows it's not like Kirkland has lost its brand or its buying power, anything like that.
I'm sure, yeah. I think that's right. And to be honest, I think one of the partners that you've spoken to for your piece said, we're a $7 billion business. Like, this only hit the margin. And, again, it's like, I guess when you're a business that big, it's unfortunate, and that some clients might follow or whatever. But at the end of the day, they do have really high performers, and they know that they can still do the work. So I don't think that would be the biggest issue they've encountered.
Yeah, some of the the people still at Kirkland, there's like endless huge names who have kind of massive books of business, and they're great at at the finance stuff, but also M&A, restructuring funds. It's not like suddenly the whole business has kind of walked out the door. And in fact, it's almost some of the other firms that have taken collateral damage. So Simpson, for example, Linklaters have lost quite a few people. Roger Johnson used to work for Linklaters, so there's that kind of connection. And a lot of these hires are sort of from these guys' contact books. They're people they worked with before. I think they can pick up the phone and say, do you want to come and join us here? And I think I always think with law firms and, a lot of businesses, it's about the story you have to tell. So if you've got a compelling story, which here is come and work for this great brand, it's a startup, we've got some really great people, we're going to do great work, and you're going to get paid really well. That's quite a nice story. Whereas, if you're working with a Magic Circle, some of the Magic Circle firms, I guess, what is the story? It's we're on the defensive, we need to grow in the US, we're changing comp, and not to knock those firms, which are great businesses, but it is like, I do think if you have a really good story to tell and you can tell it well, then you're going to be able to hire good people, and
for sure.
And these guys have done that. We have had some suggestions from people we spoke to that, that the kind of quality of the hires maybe wasn't the same over every area. There are kind of critics out there who suggest maybe that
there's always a few.
There are. That they've maybe overpaid in some areas, but I think it's kind of, I hate to do this kind of journalistic cop out and say it's too early to tell, but it is too early to tell. And I think the initial, for a first year, have they hired some really good people? Yes, they have. And do the stats show that they are, doing deals? Yes, they do. So I think it's a good start. But I think, as we say in the piece, we spoke to people who are kind of saying the real test of this is over 3 to 5 years. It's fine. It's fine when you're new and everyone's being nice to each other and all that kind of stuff. But and that's one of the other things that we talked about in the piece, that the idea is they want to build a kind of really kind of good positive culture, but I think that's one of those intangible things where everyone can go around saying we're going to build a good culture, but you actually have to do it, and it's more difficult than it is to talk about it. You know what I mean?
And I think one of the perks that they have is that obviously everyone's kind of joining within the same 18 months, so everyone's kind of new to the firm, they're all kind of in it together type of thing. But at the same time, it does mean that you need, you know, processes in place and just kind of have everyone on board with you at all times. And I think that's the harder part of creating that culture for any firm. But I think especially in this case, it's quite remarkable. So yeah, we'll see. It's going to be a few interesting years, I think, for that firm.
Yeah.
It's especially interesting to me when you see how they've gone about it compared to some other firms which are now, it seems, looking to close. So like Armstrong, Teasdale.
Sure.
Yeah.
And, you know, and it's like, you know, they came through as a merger and then clearly something didn't pan out, and now they're having to close after 2 to 3 years in business in London. So it's kind of, you know, it makes you think about actually a lot of US firms that have opened recently or have been here for a while but didn't actually build on it, including Cahill, which had built a few hires over 6 months and then now they're gone. So it's kind of, you know, it makes you think actually what's the right strategy. And I think this is quite new for US firms, and it's kind of, well, I mean, at this rate, we might as well try, you know what I mean? Yeah. We might as well see what's out there, so it's interesting.
But I think a lot of US law firms are investing in London at the moment. Maybe, I don't think anyone's doing it to this extent because, you know, like it is kind of unprecedented what they're doing. But, you know, you look at kind of McDermott, Will and Emery, they're doing a big build out, they're investing in London. I think we mentioned Cravath earlier, Davis Polk are hiring. You know, for the first time in a long time. Cleary, you know, it's a long list of US firms who have obviously decided, you know, we need to invest in London. And
for sure.
And I don't know, part of, and this is just me theorising, but I think Kirkland for years were that firm, and I guess Latham as well. But, you know, we're investing, we're hiring, we're paying, you know, huge money out to people, and for a long time a lot of people you'd speak to would say, it's, you know, it's not sustainable, it's not going to work, etc. But it clearly has worked, and I feel like there's a lot of firms out there who are looking at Kirkland and thinking like, you know, if you can't beat them, join them. And, you know, Latham among those, you know, Edin had a really great story on Latham reforming its compensation system so it can pay using super points, pay over $20 million. And you know, and, you know, look, like Paul Weiss, we talked about in the story, I'm not sure we mentioned the story actually, but introducing non-share partners, which is kind of a hallmark of Kirkland's success over the years, is using that kind of non-share partner system. So there is a kind of feeling that a lot of firms are deciding to invest, and that, you know, the market is kind of tipping towards what Kirkland have been doing because they've been so successful and their numbers are just crazy, you know, year after year.
It's really interesting to me as well because, as you said, I mean, I feel like the market on the hiring side was quieter up until this team left. And it's been, between US firms, it's just been really aggressive recently.
It's been like a game of musical chairs, I think, especially on the leverage finance side, because I think there's only so many people that do so many jobs. And when you have like these massive team moves, you really do have a hole in your practice. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely, I definitely agree with you, Meg. I think since Neil left to Paul Weiss, I think since then it's just been a game of musical chairs, really.
And I think that's one of the interesting things looking at this piece is, you know, I think we got a quote from a Kirkland partner basically saying there is space for Paul Weiss in this market. And speaking to other people, it's almost that the limiting factor is the talent, is the people rather than the work. So there are only, you know, however many credible, you know, I don't know, debt finance lawyers or high yield finance lawyers in London, you know, but the work is out there. So it's, can you get these good, credible people? And only a few firms can, and everyone else is kind of playing catch up. And you know, like Edin said, you pull, you know, like the Paul Weiss thing, you drop one new firm in, they hire a bunch of people. The ripple effect is massive. So, you know, Kirkland then go out and hire from people, then those firms have to hire. And it's just this kind of, this massive ripple effect. And I think it is, you know, if you are one of these top lawyers with a big book of business, it's a good time to be around because there's a lot of firms out there who want to be in this market.
Yeah.
But actually the limiting factor is there aren't enough good, credible people. So if you are one of them, yeah, good time for your bank balance.
For sure. And on that note, our next story, which actually is combining two stories at once. So A&O Shearman this week, has hired a couple of PE partners from Sidley. Quite big names, Paul Dunbar and Den Graham. Interestingly, at the same time, they are making people redundant.
Well, probably.
Yeah. Probably. So, I guess, we're discussing this right before recording, but I guess it's kind of expected in a post-merger situation.
Yeah.
Everyone, I guess, goes through that, and it would have probably been planned if it is happening. So, I don't know. What are your thoughts on the whole thing?
Well, yeah, so we broke this A&O probably making a job cut story on Friday. I was at the cricket and Edin spent all day. Anyway.
Yeah.
trying to get the story out, and we did eventually. But I think, like you said, it's one of those stories that it's a surprise, but it's not a surprise.
Yeah,
do you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And it's one of those things, you don't want to be like flippant about it because it's people's jobs, it's people's livelihoods.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
If you're one of the people that is probably going to get a tap on the shoulder, that really sucks for you.
Yeah.
It does,
But this is just what happens, the two firms will have areas where they just have too many people.
Yeah.
Plus, they've set kind of aggressive profitability goals, and to meet them, that will involve, cutting off some kind of fat and that kind of thing.
Absolutely.
So, from what we hear, this process could start kind of any time now, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's kind of sad, but it's one of those and it's one of those things where it's like, that kind of, it's exciting that you're doing this big merger, but, what does it mean for kind of you as an individual?
Yeah.
Maybe it might mean you might lose your job, which is a shame, but it's, this is how these businesses operate, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, it's reality. So we heard that the redundancies, we heard that they had been mulling them, but according to people close to the matter, they could start as soon as the start of this month, which is September. So yeah.
So yeah, watch this space, I think.
Watch this space, yeah.
But then on the hires, which was Edin's scoop yesterday or the day before.
Yeah.
So these Sidley guys, it's an interesting one because I think A&O have had some turnover in their private equity practice in London. So there's a guy that went to Sullivan, someone went to Davis Polk recently.
Yeah.
But they have earmarked this as an area they want to invest in for the combined firm from our previous reporting.
Yeah.
Even though neither A&O or Shearman were like private equity powerhouses.
That's what surprises me.
Yeah. But it's kind of like, private equity has been the big success story of the past 20 years in the legal industry. In a feature we did a few months ago, there were some people saying, are they kind of too late to the party? I don't know, time will tell. But obviously they do want to invest in this area. And then Sidley, again, have had a lot of turnover in private equity in London. So they hired almost what kind of kicked off this whole thing last summer was they hired a team from Paul Weiss, led by Rami Wabi, who focus on Apollo work. And that seems to have sort of unsettled Sidley. So they've had a bunch of private equity partners leave. So Lindsay Laverat to Covington, Fatima to McDermott, and now these guys to A&O. So there is that kind of musical chairs thing. Someone comes in, other people decide for whatever reason that that they don't want to stick around. And it's interesting. It's like there is that kind of element of with A&O Shearman maybe kind of giving with one hand, taking away with another. They are investing, but then probably cutting as well.
Yeah, I think what's also kind of interesting to note, I think, with this particular hire in terms of people move stories is that A&O Shearman, well, both of them before the merger, A&O have had that PE side, but Shearman have always been a lender-facing, focused firm. So they've always kind of done work with banks. And A&O still does do work with banks. It does have that lender focus, but it also has that sponsor focus as well. I think at the moment with the newly minted firm, they just have more of a bank focus, and I think they're just bolstering up on the sponsor side. So I think that's why they were keen to raft these guys in. So I think they're just bolstering that.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And in previous reporting on Shearman, when they were sort of troubled before they did this deal with A&O, one of the things people were saying was that they did kind of miss the private equity boat, that they had these great relationships. I think Citi was one of their kind of top banking relationships, and they were kind of top dogs. But then the market really, post-crisis, has massively shifted to private equity, and firms like Kirkland and Latham have kind of, and Simpson Thacher and, Paul Weiss, and the list is kind of endless, have grown kind of in a crazy way that, is unprecedented in the legal market off the back of this private equity work. Yeah. And now, now these guys are kind of thinking like, oh, we need to do more of that. And, and it'll be interesting to see what they do in the US as well, because I'm sure the US is an even bigger priority,
I'm sure.
Yeah.
I'm sure.
Yeah, I think it is. I think it definitely is interesting with this, focus, kind of private capital kind of focus. I think that, traditionally, if we look at firms, I think firms are mainly split 50-50, litigation and kind of transactional, and they kind of have that hedge. But I think because, in financial markets for the past few years, there's been so much growth, I think in private capital, I think people are just trying to jump in on their, these firms really just trying to jump in on their market share.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting though. It's a lot of this kind of law firm boom based on private equity stuff was in this kind of low interest rate era when, people were just doing anything to get a return, and, now interest rates have gone up, and, I don't know, I'm sure private equity's here to stay, but have we had the kind of, has the golden era ended? I'm not sure.
I think, what I think is when we look at kind of during, the COVID era where there were really low interest rates, and there's a lot of transactional activity, especially in 2020 and 2021, I think we saw this massive kind of boom in, transactional activity. I think because firms, I think just from a short term kind of perspective, remember looking at that 2021 boom, I think there's a sense of how can we get back to where we were? And I think that could be part of it as well.
Yeah. And it, from the stats and from what people say, it does feel like the kind of transactional market is coming back, but are we going to see those sort of heights of the low interest rate era? I don't know. But
I'm not as positive about that, but I think it's, what's interesting to me is that obviously I think either from before the merger wouldn't have been able to make these hires financially, I'm speaking. I mean, I don't see how it would have been possible. And now obviously I think it kind of sends a message across the market that actually, I don't know how much they're getting paid, but these are top tier talents. Sure. So it will be quite high and it will be for several years. So it's kind of, I just think it just sends a clear message to the market that actually they want to be serious in that particular space. They want to break into it. And I guess the only way you can do it is actually invest. I mean, fair enough to them. Hopefully it pays off, and I'm sure there'll be more of these over time. So definitely watch the space.
And I think if we're saying that, Paul Weiss's London investment is a gamble, spending all that money, which it is, I think we can say the same about A&O, the Shearman merger and the investment, that's sure to follow. They are going to kind of extend themselves and hopefully not overextend themselves. But it's, they've obviously set their sights on what they want to be. They want to go in private capital, they want to go in the US, and they're willing to kind of invest to back that up. So it will be interesting to see how it pans out.
Yeah,
definitely. Great. Well, I think we're at about time. Thank you both for joining me. Do you have anything else you wanted to add before we...
I just say, I just want to big up FN, Financial News, and say
big
that,
up FN,
so Edin joined us in January and he's been doing a great job. And
thank you.
Getting loads of great scoops. So, come read FN. We're doing lots of good stuff in the legal beat, plus our colleagues doing, investment banking, asset management, etc. are great. And our sister publication, Private Equity News, as well. So come read us. We're great.
Yeah, we're great.
Yeah. All right. Thank you both. And to the readers, we're on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and we'll be back next week for another episode.
Thanks, Meg.
Thank you, Meg.
You've been listening to Counsel Culture, the Business of Law podcast brought to you by Byfield. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and join us again next week, where we'll be discussing some more of the biggest stories in the legal sector.